welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to another episode of Syosset Public Library's podcast, Turn the Page. I am one of your librarian hosts, Stacey, and I am here with
Lisa.
And today we're very excited to interview our guest author, who is
Jamie Brenner.
Welcome back.
Yeah,
Hi. Good to be here.
So we're very excited to talk about your newest book, Gilt, which it just came out, right? I forgot I'm so bad.
It's just been about 10 days. I'm like actually losing track of time. Maybe 2 weeks today. I'm really losing track. Maybe 2 weeks.
Yeah, June 21st. I was like, I knew it was the end of June, but I couldn't remember the date because I keep forgetting it's July.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy.
But it's a beautiful book about family relationships, fun things that I enjoy, which is jewelry and antiques.
Yes.
And I like that it's an interesting book because you write it in a dual timeline.
Yes. There's the backstories on the page as well as what's happening current day. Not that much backstory. I would say it's maybe like 70-30 in terms of how much you see of the backstory. But basically, Gilt is the story of a jewelry dynasty. So many generations built up this fortune, which they created selling diamond engagement rings. Like they were the first to really sell and package the idea of love. But all the three sisters of the family have been tragically unlucky in love. So the book begins when this estranged granddaughter returns to the fold, and she's an aspiring jewelry designer herself, and she's looking for this lost heirloom, which she believes to be her birthright, this 30-carat pink diamonds. But what she really wants is a place in the family where she's been pushed out, and to understand why. So the summer is sort of the uncovering of family secrets and reconnecting with the family from her past.
Is a very, very exciting read. And I have to say, it reminded me of Blush in the sense that you talk about like a family dynasty, family legacy.
Yes.
So for this, it was like the jewelry business, but in Blush, it was the winery.
Yes. Yeah. I'm really fascinated by family businesses that have a lot of success with one generation. Maybe the first two generations like work really hard and they're innovative and they really create something special. And then it seems to get watered down with each successive generation. And if you look at huge brands in American culture, you can kind of see that happening to the corporations as they keep passing the company down. And when Gilt begins, that's sort of the state the Pavlin and Company jewelry house is in. You know, they're no longer innovating, they're coasting on their name, they're coasting on the past, and it's time to reckon with that. So think like a Tiffany & Co. or a Cartier faced with contemporary market conditions, jewelry culture. I read an article that said that whereas it used to be for any birthday or anniversary, it was just unquestioned tradition that women wanted, and some men, a piece of jewelry. And now people would like rather have a big vacation or like something that's technology related. And that whole tradition has sort of fallen by the wayside, and it's changed the way consumers buy jewelry. So it got me thinking about women and how it used to be sold to us. Like the engagement ring is this thing you wait for, and it's the most important piece of jewelry you'll ever have in your life. And I started thinking that the pieces that I love the most are just things that I've picked up for myself along the way, you know, that aren't necessarily the most technically valuable, but they're most valuable to me in terms of memories. And that's sort of what I play with in this book. You know, why is jewelry so important to us, and what makes jewelry valuable? What is value and, you know, meaning in life? And I think we confuse diamond rings, like the symbol for love, with the actual expression of love, and they're not the same thing.
It's interesting because, like you say that, and I remember when I guess like I've been married for a few years now, but when I was talking about engagement rings, and my husband was like, like engagement rings, like this isn't like a forever thing, like that, like it wasn't around forever. It's kind of like modern and everything. I was like,
Yes.
whatever, I still want one. And my mom brought me to, where'd she bring me to? Oh my God, I wish I could remember it. So for listeners, the library is in Syosset, Long Island. So my mom took me to Americana by Roslyn, where very nice, like brand name, like fancy, I call it my fancy mall. But maybe she took me to, they have like a Cartier or something like that, but she goes, you have to have a diamond education and know what like a good diamond is. Because I was like, I just want like a pretty ring that means something to me. Like it could be, like a rock that was on like the beach that we visited a lot or something.
And where did you get engaged, Stacey?
Oh, I got.
I know. I just want you to say
so much to me of how much I like shiny things in my life, and this is why, like, when I got told about your book, it was like right up my alley. I got engaged at the Museum of Natural History in the city, in the room of like minerals and jewels.
That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, my husband thinks it was the funniest thing because he knows I like looking at like jewelry and like stones and what. I just find them very pretty to look at. Like literally, sometimes on my free time when I'm like I need like a mental break, I'll just like look at fancy jewelry. Like obviously it's gonna be like super fancy and expensive. So I'm like, the idea of like colored stones like that all is mind blowing to me, and I have to be like, what does this mean? Like all the fun stuff. So I look at stones for fun. But when we got married, I didn't even want to go into the city when we got married. When we got engaged, I didn't want to go into the city, and I was like looking at this one display they had, which, I mean, this was years ago, and they completely changed that exhibit. But this one other person was also like heavily inspecting the display of this like column display case, and he's just like waiting for this woman to go. He's like, can this person leave? I was like, are you okay? Because I had no idea what was going on. He's like, after he proposed. And this is how bad I am. I didn't even wait for him to put the ring on me. I just took it myself and put it on. I was like, yes, this is great.
Yeah, well, you're totally right. It wasn't a thing until about 80 years ago. The De Beers family invented it. I mean, it's completely a marketing ploy, but probably the most successful example in modern marketing history.
Completely.
Yeah.
Like, it's wild to me to think that, like, I mean, growing up, I always thought like, yeah, this is like tradition. This is what happens.
2 months salary.
And
yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing, there's a nonfiction book that I read researching this novel called Stones, Jewelry, Obsession, and How Desire Shapes the World. And it talks about all of this, how diamonds are not inherently valuable. In fact, there was an abundance of them. They say scarcity creates value, and there were tons of diamonds, and even the whole color cut clarity thing was a marketing creation, so that if you couldn't afford a large diamond, you would say, well, mine is small, but it has great clarity.
Yeah.
So, but it has become a tradition, and there's value in traditions. But it did make me think about, how and why we do things, and lose sight sort of the truth behind it, and it was just fascinating. And I feel like that kind of aggressive marketing manipulation was a perfect backdrop to a family striving to succeed. And in fact, it's a marketing ploy on the part of the father in this book that creates all the problems, because he has this idea to drum up publicity. He says, I'm doing this competition, and the first of my 3 daughters to get engaged will be gifted the most important jewel in our collection, this 30-carat pink diamond called the Electric Rose. And once he sets that in motion, things are never the same for his family. So I kind of took the aggressive marketing De Beers did to everyone and just concentrated it on one family and showed what happened as a result.
when I read that, I was like, oh my God. Like he's saying, like, yeah, like come to, New York City, bring your boyfriend. Like I,
Yeah.
and like, it's like at first I was kind of like, maybe, like, is it what? And then I was like, oh no. But it's such a great way to set up drama with the family relationship. Like, I mean, your books are great summer reads. I personally consider you a year-round author because even though your books take
Thank
place
you.
like with summer and have beaches, it could be winter time and it's a great read still.
Thank you.
But I was just like, oh wow, like you have the jewelry and you have the setting of the locations of in the city and Provincetown. I'm just like, I'm in it for the drama of family relationships because it's so interesting the dynamic. For this book, for instance, between sisters,
Yeah.
parents, and children, it's such an interesting thing and I think readers like that because it's either something that's similar they could relate to of like whatever's going on in their own lives, or it's like, wow, like people really live like this. I thought this was just like, in like soap operas or something.
Yeah. Well, look, I have found that truth is stranger than fiction. And if you read any of these nonfiction books about dynasties, whether it's the Vanderbilts or the Gettys or whomever, you can't even make up things that are as outrageous as what happens in real life. So if I can get close, I feel like I've done a good job in the novels.
Yeah.
But I really like that. So you said you did some nonfiction reading. What was your research like for this book?
Well, this book there was a big change in my process because usually I like to be very hands-on. Like with Blush, I spent a lot of time at a vineyard. That book is set at a family winery. This book, I got the idea for the novel when I was in Sag Harbor doing research for my book Drawing Home. I went to a store called Matriarch, and it's a store that only sells clothes and jewelry by female designers. And the first thing I saw when I got to the store was this display of these large charms, letters and numbers that were really big and chunky and cool. And she said, oh yeah, that jewelry is Lulu Frost, the designer Lulu Frost, and that's her Plaza collection. And what Lulu Frost did was when the Plaza was being dismantled to be renovated, she collected all the fixtures on the doors, like all the markings for the rooms, letters and numbers, and turned them into charms to wear on bracelets and necklaces. Wow. And I just thought that is such a smart idea. And it's like what jewelry should be. It's like personal because it could be your initials, but it's a little piece of New York City history. And that's what started me thinking about, writing a story set in the jewelry world, because I think jewelry tells our story to the world. Jewelry tells a narrative as much as books do. So I reached out to the designer, Lulu Frost. Her real name is Lisa Salzer. And I asked her if I could come to her studio and watch her work in researching this novel. And she was great. And she said yes. And I was all set to do that. And this was February of 2020. So wow. Quickly, that was not going to happen. And so for the first time, this is my 7th novel. For the first time, I couldn't do any in-person research for the book. But luckily, as I mentioned, there is this amazing nonfiction book and by a woman named Aja Radin. And it's a New York Times bestseller, and it reads like a novel. And it really gave me the threads I needed to write this book. It spoke about the history of marketing diamonds in America and how this wasn't something that was always done. It talked about the curse, the idea of diamonds being cursed, which is also something I'm fascinated with, because I grew up in the 80s and Elizabeth Taylor was still running around with these outrageous diamonds and emeralds, and she was sort of the standard bearer of all things important jewelry.
And then she named her perfume White Diamonds.
Exactly. Exactly. And I'm like, oh, that was the standard. I mean, she had the ultimate jewelry collection. But then, I did some reading, and the Hope diamond is allegedly cursed, and this diamond. So the book Stoned addresses this, and it talks about how the Hope diamond was originally Marie Antoinette stone. It was called the French blue, and then it disappeared and it reappeared in 1823 as the Hope, and everyone who's owned it has suffered misfortune. And there's several examples of that. There's a diamond called the Black Orlov, 195 carat black diamond. Everyone who's owned it has had either financial ruin or death or terrible family problems. So it started me thinking, is there such a thing as curses, cursed stones, or is it the sort of greed and choices that it takes to acquire things like this that is just a self-fulfilling prophecy and leads people to a bad end? So that's something I wanted to play with in the book as well. And luckily I was able to find anything I needed without, being able to go to a studio. And I think it actually wouldn't have been the same book if I hadn't gone down such a heavy research path in terms of reading and not just seeing what's being done in modern day.
Wow. That's interesting. Like, I know we've talked to authors in the past of like how the pandemic and everything have affected writing, but like I have to say, for me, this is like the person to be like, oh, like it would have been a possibly different book if you would have done your research differently. But that's interesting because you brought up like the different like well-known diamonds that are, like the Hope diamond. Like every now and then I'm like, these are giant. Like, how do people wear them? Like, it always astounds me.
It doesn't snag on things all the time.
I'm imagining. Right now we're like my simple wedding band just because I have a young child and I tend to knock my hand around, so I don't want to ruin any nice jewelry. But just thinking of how I would wear that as like a ring or like jewelry, and with the idea of cursed stones, because you say how the electric rose is cursed. I'm more curious, how did you decide that it was going to be a pink stone and the name electric rose for it?
Well, let me think. This is so bad, but do you remember when Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck were first engaged?
Yes, and she had this beautiful
the first time.
I actually like that ring more than the one she has now, which is
yes. And he gave her this pink diamond, and I was like, wow, that's really unique. And I think it might have even been heart-shaped or something outrageous. I can't remember. But so I started.
I want to say it was.
Yeah, I started researching pink diamonds, and there was this fabulous stone up for auction at Christie's or Sotheby's called the Pink Star. And so I based my stone on that. So there is one that exists. It was auctioned for a fortune. If anyone wants to see what a 30 carat pink diamond looks like, you can Google Pink Star. And that's sort of what I had in my mind for the version in my book.
Because I'm always like curious about that, because you say how jewelry tends to be personal for someone. I mean, I know a lot of people like either to what I remember, they either like get, family heirlooms to be engaged to, or they have a hand in picking out what their ring's gonna look at. Like I chose what setting I wanted. I was like, husband, do whatever you want for whatever stone, but this is what I like for me.
Yeah.
And we like, made it together in a sense. But I like that because what you said of like, jewelry is a story of its own on a person, of like what they find, what could be meaningful to them. I mean, Lord knows I see enough advertisements across social media about like your astrological sign, we made this for you. And I'm just like, I'm always so intrigued by it because I mean, I know I like jewelry meaningful for me just because it's something that even makes it deeper, like what you said about the Lulu Frost piece. Is like I was like, oh, that's really cool because you have, it's personalized if it's like your favorite number or your initial, you or one you love. And it kind of makes me wonder now in the setting of the world of Gilt, what would like the idea of the like push presents when a woman gives birth, because I've seen jewelry as that a lot.
Yeah.
And it's just, I'm kind of like, I wonder like how that would play out also with that family.
Yeah.
Like, I like how your book, you kind of could think about what else they would do.
Right. Well, that's why also, setting it in Provincetown was really useful because there's so many, on Cape Cod has so many antique shops and estate sales. And one of the sisters in the book, she basically opts out of the whole jewelry thing and she goes to Cape Cod and she's she sells antiques. And I love the idea, which Lulu Frost did, of taking something old and not even necessarily jewelry and repurposing it, so the idea is like, look, we don't have to keep excavating like the grounds and finding more and more. Like if we look at things we already have, they're beautiful, they're meaningful. And I really have come to be fascinated by and really in love with estate jewelry. And that was something I picked up, the idea of things being passed down, even if it's not from your family, like it had a life before you owned it. And to me, that gives it, more meaning than just something that's like one of a million that you can buy, produced by a mass production thing. So that was interesting. There was another book that made me think about how jewelry travels from person to person, and it's called Diving for Starfish by Cherry Burns. And Cherry Burns wrote a biography of the socialite Millicent Rogers. And Millicent Rogers had this very rare brooch. It's a starfish, and like all the legs are gems, and the legs are articulated, and there's only 5 ever created. And she tracks down where this woman's missing starfish went and talks about secrecy in the jewelry trade and how some pieces they go underground for decades, and it could, you could lose track of something because of like a backroom deal for a piece and never see it again. And this really gave me some input in terms of the mystery and how could the pink diamond disappear. What types of mechanisms are in place in this industry to allow someone to hide it, sell it, move it in some way that no one, even the watching eyes of the world, can't keep track of. So that was another thing that I found very interesting.
Definitely. Like I thought it was a really good read. And I mean, a lot of other people agree too, because before we hopped on to interview, I was like, oh, let me see like what other people have said, because I usually like reading reviews. Just bring up like a point here or there, and just rave reviews across the board for it.
Thank you.
I love all the blurbs. Like, there was one I like what Publishers Weekly said. This beach read sparkles like a 2-carat diamond. Like it was just, they're really cute blurbs. And like there was another good one from Fiona Davis. But it's something fun to read. I mean, like summer, it's gorgeous out. You want to be on the beach and like reading about this, because I would say I agree with other reviewers. I could equate like this book with like you're waiting for like the next like Elin Hildebrand of like waiting for like, ooh, like what's gonna happen now? Like it's light, but there's moments of drama and like the secrecy that brings real life to it, or like truth to it.
Yes, thank you. Well, it was fun. I mean, look, writing, I like to write escapist books. Writing for me is an escape. The summer that I wrote this book, I was actually living in Provincetown. So this is my 3rd book set at that particular beach, but the first time I lived there full time while I was writing it. So that was interesting. For example, for those of you who have read it, that scene with the dolphin rescue really happened. I was having a hard time concentrating, as I think so many people did that summer of 2020. And I stopped working for the day. I went to the beach, and there I saw all these trucks parked. And then I realized there were these like tarps covered, like half a dozen dolphins just on this tarp in the parking lot. And my husband and I stayed and we watched them bring the dolphins to the water to release them. They'd saved them from some situation in Wellfleet, brought them to Provincetown. And it was just such an amazing thing to witness that, I wrote it into the book, and I probably would never think to do that if I hadn't been living there and just happened to catch that moment.
That I would have thought was something like never would have witnessed, but that's cool that like real life.
Yes.
So you lived in Provincetown full time, like throughout like the winter also, or just the summer?
I left in January or late December of that year.
You had like a lot of seasons there.
I'm sorry?
I said you had a lot of seasons there. You had summer, fall, bit of winter.
Well, yeah. Well, I was just thinking about how much it must empty out like in the fall, and how like different it must be.
Oh, it's very different. And, if it wasn't for the pandemic state of that time, I probably wouldn't have done that. And it's almost hard to remember now that there was nothing happening anywhere anyway. So it was almost felt very natural. And it was actually very nice to be in a place that was, remote, and you didn't have to, coming from New York, where like you're just constantly bumping into people on the street or here. It was exactly what we needed. But yes, it's a very different existence in the winter, but there's writers and artists who like it, especially in the winter. Michael Cunningham wrote in the book Land's End about how he spent his first winter writing a novel there. And it can either make you really sort of lost, mentally and emotionally because of the solitude, or it can give you exactly what you need to create. And I think a lot of artists find the latter.
The distractions are gone.
Yes. And the distractions are gone. And, the place itself is just so beautiful. It gives you a lot. And I've said that before. I've written books set in different beach towns, Sag Harbor and the Jersey Shore, and I'm looking at a new one for my next book. But you never know until you get somewhere, like how much a place is going to give to you. And Provincetown just gives so much. I thought I was just going to set the forever summer there, and I just keep going back. I keep going back to it.
But that's really cool, because it's kind of like, a little, I don't want to say Easter egg between like the books that you featured in, but it's kind of like a nice kind of like, oh, like we're back here. Like I know this place.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I've been doing it every other book now, and I have some characters from other books sort of wandering through. So I do feel like I'm going home when I start a book there, and I think hopefully readers start to feel that way too.
Yeah, I mean, I like that as a reader. I can't speak for the masses, but I always get like when I'm like, oh, like that's really cool, and I like when you could kind of see characters from other stories, because
Yes.
I love world building, and like when things could kind of like cross over, I'm like, oh, that's so cool, and then I end up in a rabbit hole of rereading everything, which is still fine. But you brought up that you're working on something new. Is this going to be your 8th book?
Yes.
Are you able to talk about it or not really?
Yes. So I'm working on a book about a woman who built this whole perfume company. Like she's a famous, they're called noses, people who create scents. And she created something that's as iconic as Chanel No. 5. But one thing she's always resisted is doing a celebrity fragrance, which became really trendy like 15 years ago, like Jennifer Lopez and Sarah Jessica Parker. But she never did that. She's been a purist, except for now she's finally relented. She's meeting with this famous pop star to create her first celebrity scent. And the day of the meeting, she goes to the office and she realizes she's lost her sense of smell.
Ooh.
And she decides she needs to turn to her 3 grown children to see who can sort of step in and help while she's dealing with this. And that, of course, creates the summer of drama.
Well, that's something that a lot of people can identify, because a lot of people with COVID lost their sense of smell.
Yeah.
It came back for a lot of
know.
people, but a lot of people had that lingering,
like muted sense of smell.
I know. Well, those articles, there were so many articles about it. And I thought it was really interesting because that's a sense we sort of take for granted. We might think about losing our eyesight or hearing, but I don't think many people thought before this happened about losing your sense of smell. And apparently, it's very, very traumatic. And I read a lot that scent is most closely related to our memories, more so either than, a song or taste. It's sense of smell. So if that's taken away, what does that do to you? And then I thought, and how much worse would it be if that was the way you made your living? So that was sort of the idea of this woman's dilemma, although it's not COVID related, because I didn't want to write a book set in that time.
No,
I understand not wanting to do that, but that's interesting, because I mean, so like I at one point had COVID, and I didn't lose sense of smell or taste, but when I was like reading about stuff, because I got paranoid, that I was like, oh my God, what if I lose my sense of smell? That sense and taste are related. That like if you lose that, like it affects when you eat something, and like that to me, as someone who loves food, I was like, I hope that never happens. But I mean, luckily it didn't. But it's just like, that's wild to think like how it could impact so much, because you said it's sense that we definitely take for granted.
Well, they
Yeah.
said that like during COVID, they said they always could tell when there was a peak because people would complain to Yankee Candle that they were having problems smelling the candles. So they would say, there's something wrong with
Wow.
Yankee Candles. And they would say, oh, here comes another COVID peak because all these people are
Wow.
complaining. They don't even realize it.
I didn't even
That's-
correlate that.
That's amazing.
Oh, wow. That's really crazy.
Yeah, it is.
Oh. And before we go, I have a last question of, are you reading anything or watching anything now that you would recommend to anybody?
Oh my goodness. I'm always reading something. Okay. So I just read an arc that's coming in March by a writer named Julie Gerstenblatt. It's called Daughters of Nantucket, and it's historical, and it's a really wonderful read about women finding their strength and community, and it's fantastic. That's coming early March 2023. And I'm reading the biography of George Michael called
Oh,
George Michael, A Life. And
Ooh.
it's really it's a very interesting look at the industry, but also sort of a sad look at someone who touches people so much artistically, but had such a hard time, being true to himself, and the inherent conflict between what you have to sell and who you really are, which, kind of goes back to the idea of value and the story we tell versus the true story. And there's just so much there. So I'm like halfway through it, and I really like it, even though I find it a little bit sad considering like how beautiful and happy his music was.
right.
Yeah. That's interesting. I'm going to have to look into that book.
Yeah.
I mean, considering like one of the gotta have faith like resides in my head like all the time.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and it's definitely a time capsule for pop music in the 80s. And as you know, like I like stories about career arcs and how people get where they are and like what happened along the way, and especially seeing that things aren't always as easy as they look. That's like interesting drama right there.
Well, thank you for recommending those.
Sure.
And thank you so much for talking to us about your book.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime, you're always welcome back. And if you ever want to come in person, you're welcome to the library too.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I wish you guys happy summer reading moving forward. There's a lot out there.
Yeah, I'm excited though, because I mean, even though your book just came out, like I could be, Lisa's in charge of our staff picks. I could be like, hey, got another one for you. I think it's a good read. I really like. I have to say I'm a really big fan of your books with the family dynamics. Like I'm like, ooh, and like
Thank you.
if your books ever become TV shows or movies, count me in to watching it.
Oh my
I
gosh.
must say, like I feel like I'm advertising to like, yeah, put me in a story. I can't act, but it's like I feel like it could be translated very well to screen.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Maybe someday we'll be checking back. I just recently got to speak to Robin Carr on the Friends and Fiction podcast. She wrote
Oh,
Virgin
nice.
River.
Yeah.
And so she was talking about how, she was really able to let go in terms of control and let them roll with what they needed to do creatively to adapt that. And I thought it was really interesting to hear because, some people struggle with that or they resist it. And she says she loved seeing how sometimes they made choices that she disagreed with, and sometimes they made choices that made her say, oh, I wish I'd written it that way. So I loved hearing her experience about having the Virgin River series adapted. Yeah. So who knows?
Cool. Yeah, you never know.
Never know.
Once
Thank you
again.
so much.
Yeah, thank you for coming. We're going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.